This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Thank you, Oma. This is the property subcommittee meeting of August 17, starting at 6:21 p.m. We have the Councilor Zaret and Councilor Gomez and myself in attendance. I'm J.P. Krasinski. We, I believe, have been able to admit everyone. Please bear with us on any technical difficulties. We had a little bit of difficulty the last time we tried to meet, and I think we're working through them. But with a little bit of help, we'll be able to get through. We had on the agenda an opportunity for minutes, but we don't have any minutes to approve, I believe. There were no minutes from the walkthrough we had at the three schools where we were dealing with Pepin Center and Maple Streets. And that is definitely on the agenda to discuss this evening. We had a recently posted agenda for August that came out on August 16. There had been some confusion, and there is the matter of the new city plan. And I believe that was posted yesterday, and that would not have been sufficient time for us to discuss formally the matter. I believe it's noted on our agenda as being present. It's something that we have on the agenda. I would at this time like to ask if we may, while we're on the subject, to discuss with the councilors if they would like to see this on our agenda for Monday's meeting. We have on Monday the property subcommittee meeting at 6 o'clock, the 22nd. There would be room and time to be able to put the new city agenda, and it looked like it was something that we should start urgently to pursue. There was a request to move expeditiously from the planning department. Is that something we would be in agreement to do?
I'm okay with that. Too, I'm just trying to get some clarity. So I'm looking at some of those actions, and I'm trying to see which of those is actually under the purview of the property committee.
Well, I didn't want to. I don't think any of them are particularly relevant to property, and so we were all, I think, a bit surprised to see them be on the property agenda. But Councilor Derby was the chair at the August meeting, and it just so happened that each one of the property committee members was unable to, for one reason or another, to attend that meeting. So it got shipped off to property. As we know, any matter can be sent to any committee. And so it was sent to us. I would be happy to discuss putting it back onto another committee, ordinance perhaps, but for discussion purposes, it's within our committee at this time.
Yeah, I mean, without deliberating it, I would say that my vote would be certainly can discuss it, and there's other committees here that are mentioned, so I guess we can always decide if we want to refer it as a group. That would be my input.
So we could do that on Monday, and why don't we put that on the agenda? Well, it is on our agenda, and we'll discuss it on Monday. Meanwhile, any public speak at this time? We would entertain public to speak on any matter other than what's on the agenda. I don't see any hands. Does anyone else?
Yes, we have the mayor.
We have the mayor.
Yes, Kate, I saw you too, but Mr. Chairman, we have the mayor and then we have Kate Benningham-White.
Let's start with the mayor.
I'll pass the time right now to Kate because I need to find my notes.
Okay, we had Kate.
Kate?
We cannot hear you.
Muted.
Let me see if I can ask her to.
See, Kate, I can see if I could No.
No, she's muted. She left the room. We have Kim now.
She left the room. Kim, I guess you're up next. For any matter that's not on the agenda, can we, it appears that everyone is muted. Is that a function that we can,
What are we running on? Kian, can you try to unmute yourself? It's not working.
Yeah, what's the little exclamation point on top of the, like in the bottom, it says property subcommittee.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's weird.
Let me
I've never seen
Oh, that is weird. Oh, there? Probably there's no microphone. Maybe that the mic's disabled. That's my guess.
see. Oh.
Are you able to hear?
Yes. Who was that?
It's Kate.
I can hear
Yes,
Kate.
now we can hear you.
So let's
I
go.
have it all written down. I have to read it. Can I say what I want to say?
This would be with, for something that isn't on our agenda currently,
This is about the school reuse.
the school reuse. I would ask that we take public comment about that after the councilors have had their discussion at this point.
Can you say everything's breaking up for me? Can you say that again?
Okay, I will try to speak a little slower. We will take any public input into the matter. I would be happy to recognize folks to discuss what's on the agenda a bit further. I didn't know if there was something else that we had in mind or anyone had in mind to discuss that was not on our agenda for the public speak.
No, no. I thought
Thank
you
you.
were opening it up.
No,
but you're not. Okay.
not yet.
Yeah, we have
Okay.
the mayor.
Bear with us. Anyone else on something that isn't on the agenda?
We have the mayor.
The mayor for something that isn't on the agenda, please.
Hi, Chair, I'd like to read a joint proclamation that has been signed by myself, the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership, the Economic Development and Industry Committee, and the Easthampton Housing Coalition. That is not specific to any item on the agenda. The proclamation affirms the city's historic actions for affordable housing, whereas there's a shortage of housing at all levels and types throughout Easthampton and the region, and there is critical need for safe, decent, and affordable housing for people with incomes below 80% of area median income in Easthampton. And whereas Easthampton was last successful in supporting the development of affordable housing in 2015 with the completion of 38 units at Parsons Village under 40B and 50 units at Cottage Square under 40R. And whereas the city now holds a Department of Housing and Community Development Chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory known as SHE as of April 22, 2022 of 6.9% of the 2010 census year-round housing units representing 523 subsidized units. And whereas several multi-member volunteer bodies such as the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership, Easthampton Housing Coalition, the Community Preservation Act Committee, the Planning Department are working with state agencies to leverage state programs to encourage and remove barriers to affordable housing in Easthampton. And whereas beginning in 2018, the city has updated essential plans that address housing and affordability, including its housing production plan, open space and recreation plan, downtown strategic plan, arts and culture vision plan, and local rapid recovery plan. And whereas in 2018, the mayor asked the planning department with a publicly driven downtown strategic plan and in 2020 with a housing need and production plan to guide the city's decision about housing, and the completed plans detail community needs and desires with data points on how to and when and where to create housing. Whereas since 2018, the city has made its first DIF district and approved its first tax incentive to support the creation of up to 100 units at 1 Ferry Street. And whereas in 20 and 21, the Easthampton zoning ordinance were amended to allow accessory dwelling units with a building permit to enable development with 15% affordable housing by rate, and to create a new 40R sub-district on Northampton Street, all intended to reduce the barriers to the creation of new housing units. And whereas in 2020, the mayor asked the planning department to utilize CPA funds to explore and evaluate sites suitable for the creation of affordable housing. And whereas in 2021, the Affordable Housing Fair Partnership was approved by CHAPA's Municipal Engagement Initiative to receive technical assistance to create a broad coalition of city residents and leaders to support affordable housing. Whereas in 2021, the mayor established an elementary reuse committee that was supported by the planning department and a $21,000 EEA planning assistant grant to prepare a draft RFP for the reuse of the city's 3 elementary schools based on data collected from public input associated with the 2018 Downtown Strategic Plan and the 2020 Housing Production Plan, and which identifies the pursuit of affordable housing as the most beneficial. Whereas in May 2022, a resident composed school reuse committee submitted to City Council a draft RFP for the elementary schools for consideration. Whereas the time is now, given the well thought out, publicly inclusive process to work with local, regional, state, and federal agencies to bring affordable housing units to Easthampton ASAP. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the mayor determines the current efforts to preserve existing affordable housing and new affordable housing must be redoubled, and ask staff, boards, committee, and the community to continue to identify opportunities to achieve that goal. And further, it be resolved that the city council pursue all opportunities to preserve and increase affordable housing opportunities in Easthampton when responsible and possible. And further be resolved that the city aggressively explores the creation of affordable housing opportunities via the disposition of surplus and tax title properties, housing feasibility studies, public outreach, capital planning, economic development, tax incentives, ordinance amendments, and grants to nonprofit affordable housing developers to create more inclusive neighborhoods and increase the housing supply regardless of city address. Therefore, I, Nicole LaChapelle, Mayor of Easthampton, do hereby proclaim Easthampton's historic commitment to affordable housing. The proclamation, as I said before, is co-signed by Jana Tatro from the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership, Gwen Morrissey, chair of the EDIC, and Kaim Jamrog McCoyne of the Easthampton Housing Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity.
Please send the. Go ahead.
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that's, I think that members of this committee would agree wholeheartedly to work on every manner possible to increase affordable housing here in Easthampton on all levels. I would open that up to Councilor Zaret and to Councilor Gomez for a moment, if you'd care to make a comment. No. Councilor Gomez? Excellent. Thank you. I think that is everyone else who was under public speak. Is that your understanding? Does anyone from the committee see anyone else? Sometimes we all can't see.
I don't see anyone, Mr. Chairman, but I know a few minutes ago I saw Kiam. I don't know if he was saying something that is not related to the agenda? Okay, perfect.
Okay, excellent. I would kind of re-summarize of where we're at. We're in receipt of the mayor's report, the committee's report, and I believe we're in the process of doing our due diligence to look at the various properties and make the best plans for our community. We did hold a meeting, not a meeting, but a tour of the various facilities. I will say that it had been my impression that there are some distinct differences among the facilities in terms of their general condition and future utility, as I see it. And I just wanted to thank everybody who came in attendance to those tours. There were several counselors and members of the public. There was also at least one group who had expressed some interest in, to some degree, in at least one of the properties. So, I at this time would open up to the counselors any comments they'd like to make about the various conditions of the buildings, and I would start with the members of the committee.
Sure. I mean, in no particular order. I think each of the properties kind of definitely has their own unique traits. I think of all of them, and this is from a completely untrained and unprofessional eye. This is Owen Zarek speaking, by the way. Sorry. I felt that center school seemed to be in the least desirable condition. I also felt that its location in terms of use of the building, and in terms of its proximity to the Pepin was of interest in regard to whether choosing to preserve the building or use that space for something else, such as parking. But I also felt that the building as it stands right now seems most amenable to housing. I think that the parcel and the building for Maple lends itself to a few different uses, as well as begs the question of private use with some allowance for public parking, as well as question of potentially developing green space. I'd have to get a better understanding about how much impervious surface is currently there in terms of what would be allowed, how many parking spaces would be created outside the building or not. Again, I think that building also lends itself very easily, I think, to developing housing units and or some sort of mixed use between housing and offices or some sort of commercial space. I found Pepin to be interesting in terms of the overall size of the building and the layout of the building, in terms of almost having two wings with a small connecting corridor. I believe it has 30 plus spaces, but based on the size of the building, it almost feels that the amount of parking is you almost want a little bit more. I don't know how you create that, although you do have somewhat shared use of the center space, and whether if that playground were removed in the process, that would create more parking. I think it goes without saying, and this was identified in the draft RFP, that we have substantial community resources in the form of the gymnasium, which appears to be an exceptional space, as well as the other related rooms down there, the locker rooms in the office, and then certainly the cafetorium also seems to be a substantial city resource, both of which certainly the gymnasium, if that were to be removed for other developmental purposes, I don't see how we would get that resource back. I do think you could, to some degree, claim that there's some duplication with the auditorium, although I think that its specific layout and being centered in town, I also think is a significant resource and amenity that I don't know how we would be able to duplicate that in its absence. That being said, too, that building I feel lends itself to a number of uses, both including residential units, some form of offices, There is currently some sort of a layout in the basement for a library, but that certainly could be converted, and it's not. I don't feel as that stands as hard and firm as some of those other spaces in terms of how it's defined. But I could see a variety of mixed uses for the Pepin building, which would include certainly seeking very strongly to preserve. And I know that that's looked at as most desirable on the draft RFP or recommended RFP. Those two spaces with looking to maybe consider a mixture of housing and nonprofit offices, or even potentially expanding some use of city space to that building. And those are just some general thoughts. I haven't organized those better, but I just wanted to, at the risk of talking too long, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Councillor Zaret. Councillor Gomez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that what Councillor Zaret was accurate, but I have to add to with the group of people that we went to the site visit, we saw some of the needs for some people in our community for those buildings. At the end of the day, we have to see what is the best, the needs of the whole as a community, for the community as a whole, and what is going to be the best for the three buildings to serve in our community. I think it's really appropriate to tell everybody that we have a proposal RFP in front of us. We have the person who was not in charge completely, because there was a group of people working on that RFP. And I think it's really important from us and to the public to understand that proposal and the possibility of how much we can change, if we're going to change something, or just accept it as the way that it is. I know we have Michael Owens, and he is in this meeting tonight, and I think it is important for us to hear him and hear his expertise about this RFP and what this RFP includes that can potentially include our concerns and what will be the needs of our community. I think that's where I am now. I just want to hear more from the RFP. I think eventually, probably next meeting at this committee, we should have a public hearing to keep listening to people. But I think we should start moving forward with the proposal RFP that we have in front of us, and start working on it, like making recommendations, change something we have to change, or just do something with it. But I think it's time to start working on it, especially that I think it's interesting for a few developers to start working on it and to see what is going to be the best for the community. You're muted.
Thank you. I would invite any other councillors here to chime in at this time if especially if they were on the tour. I see Councillor Riley, and I'm not sure we have others, but Councillor Riley, I would open it up to you if you had some comments at this time regarding your impressions of the three facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so, I did take a walkthrough of the facilities with you all. Admittedly, I only did the first two. I didn't see the full third building with you all. I just wanted to contextualize. I was also one of the members on the committee that drafted this RFP. And, I have heard some of the ideas and thoughts that other councillors think that we could potentially do with this, sections of the properties. And we have built that into the RFP process. The matrix that ranks things on how advantageous they are takes into consideration, community benefits. If I were to have a specific opinion on this matter, I would urge you all to accept the RFP in its form that it's currently in. We spent about 18 months drafting this RFP. There were some very thoughtful conversations that went into it. And almost the entirety of the document is based on public feedback from the Downtown Strategic Initiative work that happened. So we ultimately crafted an RFP that was based on public perception and community need. And the only other thing that I will say in terms of, if we are to, portion out the buildings for multiple uses, in conversations that I had with nonprofit developers, if we are portioning out parts of the building, then that leaves very little room to build a certain number of affordable housing units inside these structures. And what ends up happening in a situation like that is once we fall below a certain number of affordable housing units in a structure, then nonprofit developers cannot apply for the low-income housing tax credit. And that's really vital for these organizations to develop affordable housing units without making a profit and without coming in operationally at a financial loss. So, if we were to consider things like taking the theater and the gymnasium, or if we're to open it up to nonprofit organizations, that has the potential to functionally lock out any nonprofit developers from making bids on these properties. And the concern with that is, if we go with a private developer, then the amount of affordable housing units that they have to build out of total housing units is substantially less. If a nonprofit developer develops the property, so, for example, we have Valley CDC as a nonprofit developer, their developments are 100% affordable housing units. They don't do, housing units that are above market rate or anything like that. So I understand that there's an opportunity to really consider what these buildings can look like. If we don't have housing units for our historically excluded populations, then who are we building these extra things for? And who are we excluding from those services? Housing is such a difficult topic to talk about right now, particularly when we think of the impacts that the pandemic has had in our communities. We don't actually know what those numbers look like yet, but across the board, we know that every metric of social services has the amount of inequity has increased in every single instance. And we won't know those numbers yet for housing yet. That'll probably take another year before we start to realize the full impact, but I can assure you it's gotten absolutely worse. There are people in Easthampton who are waiting on affordable housing, and the longer we try to think about what this development of these 3 properties looks like, the longer we're telling these folks in Easthampton, you have to wait longer for affordable housing. You have to wait longer. And I mean, we're already talking years before we can actually have folks moving in to well-developed affordable housing units. If we try to go back to the drawing board and pick apart things with the RFP process, then, we could potentially be adding another 6 months on top of this process. And I just want everybody who makes decisions about these types of things to be mindful that we are just the decision makers, and it makes sense as a decision maker to take an extra few months and be thoughtful about things. But if you are a person who has children and you are housing insecure, a couple extra months of us being mindful is the difference between ending up in a homeless shelter. So I just want to contextualize that human element of what we're up against. I believe in this RFP. I believe in all of the work that everybody put into it. I would urge everyone from City Council to pass it exactly as it is written. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Riley. I don't see any other councilors here. I guess I would comment to say, I think we need to do our due diligence in this process, and I think that's recognized. I think that the mayor and the committees that put together the RFP proposal have spent lots of time. I would expect that they would expect us to look at it very carefully. So I think we're going to certainly be doing that. I would tend to think that we may have to look very closely at the number of units, as you mentioned, Councilor Riley, that we below a certain threshold, there may not be interest by nonprofit developers. And as you noted, that by bringing in private developers, it becomes much more challenging to load the project with affordable housing. There are certain minimum standards. We could set minimum standards. We could say that it needs to be 100%, but I'm not sure just by saying so, we would entice developers to go ahead and see the project as being viable without certain economic incentives. As you mentioned, the low-income housing tax credits. I certainly would like to explore that a bit more and understand better the numbers as you see them as minimum standards, because I certainly see much more public use available either for various city uses in the near future. At the Pepin building is what I'm describing. I think that section carries with it, as Councilor Zaret had mentioned, if we lose the resources there, we not only might shut out other nonprofits and shut out other possible uses, but we also will lose some resources that are just, I don't think we'll ever get back. The gymnasium or another auditorium like this, with the limited food service capacity that exists there. I think that really needs to be thought through very carefully. So I would be certainly hoping that we could discuss the numbers a bit more carefully here. And I would expect that in our next meeting, we would begin to do that and fully see that impact and weigh it against what the other community needs may be. After all, we're responsible for weighing all the community needs. I would see us, at least initially, I don't think any of the council members have any other potential uses for Maple or Center properties. And I don't know if as a possibility, those two could be moved forward just as a possibility. And if that would provide, get us moving forward in moving quickly to meet immediate needs for affordable housing. But that's something I think that we ought to be thinking about and talking about as a possibility. Not advocating it one way or another, but certainly putting it on the table. I also would think that we have to begin, as Councilor Gomez had mentioned, to look at the specifics of the RFP. I think as we go through the RFP, it's important that whatever the RFP is, that the council is in agreement with the mayor's office, because that's the only way we can proceed with any RFP, is to find areas of agreement. So I will be looking forward to finding whatever areas of agreement we can here. With regard to the process, I think we ought to be meeting regularly, perhaps every 2 weeks, to be moving this forward as rapidly as possible in our discussions. I would entertain any other counselors' ideas as to how we should structure those discussions, whether we start to tackle the RFP, whether we start to tackle the process of how we look at the individual buildings. Does it make sense to discuss this in a specific way? Counselors on the committee? Go ahead.
I do feel and agree that we need to set a. There's been a little delay in getting to this point, and I understand that it has to do with individual schedules and such. I do agree that we, both out of respect for the process and the work that's come before us, we do need to schedule some sort of plan now. And I agree. I think every 2 weeks sounds good, so we can start moving forward. I'd even be opening to setting some of those future meetings now, so the public is also aware when they show up. My input would probably be to maybe assign some homework, Mr. Chairman, and maybe have an in-depth review by the members of this committee of the recommended RFP for each building, and to be able to come back and discuss that in a well-informed manner, and then also as well as to provide any thoughts or amendments that we have. I would just also echo what Councilor Gomez said earlier too, that we have to think about what fits for the whole community, and also as we're expanding our community, we have to think about if that means that we want to make sure that we're including resources for those people that we're opening our community to, and if that happens to be part basically of how we think about the RFP, or just more of a broad discussion. So that's all.
Councilor Gomez?
No, at this moment, I don't have any comment. The only comment that I could do is I do agree to have a meeting every other week and start moving with the RFP one way or the other, approving their RFP that we have in front of us, or changing a few things with it, but at least start working on it. Winter is coming. If we don't do anything with those buildings, probably we have to spend a ton of money on heating and maintenance. So we have to start thinking about what we're gonna do with those buildings as soon as possible.
I agree. Winter's coming. I think no matter what gets started, the city will be holding those buildings throughout this winter, whether we go directly to an RFP today. The buildings are just going to be there. And there is a bidding process, a review process, and I don't think we can transfer anything, unless I'm mistaken, quickly to avoid the winter months. That is pretty much a given. Maybe you could shave off a month. I'm not sure. But I think, yes, winter will be coming. So we'll be dealing with that. In terms of any procedures, I'm sorry, in terms of the dates, I would suggest that then, if it makes sense, to go with the 31st of August for our next meeting.
At what time?
I would ask for 6 o'clock. Is that agreeable with everyone? All right, 6 p.m. And I certainly would be amenable to moving forward to the 14th, if that makes sense. A Wednesday also, 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Just so we could plan that on our schedule.
Yep.
I will note that we did receive a communication late in the day today saying that the school committee chair had indicated that the schools were no longer needed by the school department, and that was as of we just got that late this afternoon. So we will be expecting some language from the attorney's office which would divide this up, the questions that the attorney had written to us, enabling us to accept the property. And I think in principle, we're in agreement with accepting the property. Maybe not, maybe there'll be further discussion. But I would like to be able to take that up, and hopefully we'd have something from the attorney's office by the meeting on August 31st, so that it could be presented formally to the council for our September 7th meeting as a possibility. If that works, I think that would be desirable. The only question in my mind was in looking at the conditions of the buildings. I imagine as the school department was leaving the process, leaving the buildings, that they wouldn't be investing tons of money into the property. I would think that as you wind down, you might not. Okay, look at we don't have to fix the floors, improve the floors, whatever the matter is. The heating system is okay. So I'm not sure if that's something that we should be examining, or whether we just felt that, well, it's really money on one hand and money on the other hand, and it's all kind of city money anyway. So we should just consider taking it as is, or asking for anything to be repaired. As we went through the buildings, I just wanted to be sure that we open that up to the table to the members of the property subcommittee. Any thoughts about that?
I think someone, might have been you, someone recommended go and speak. And
Yeah, and he's writing.
Sure, yeah.
He's right there. Michael Owen wanna talk, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry?
Michael Owens wanna say something to the committee.
Wanted to say something to the committee, sure. So no particular comments from the other members of the committee about that. So there's no special questions we would want to ask of the school department. Excellent. Michael Owens.
My only question is, have we made a decision on what we're doing with what's happening with the surplus inventory there? Is that being auctioned, or do we know? Okay, then I guess that will be answered.
I didn't hear that the answer to that. Is that something Michael was going to say?
Yeah, Michael is good answer. Yeah.
All right, good. I was hoping you might be able to comment on that, Michael. I thought you might be involved in that.
Very good. Thank
Michael,
you, Councilor.
just tell us your role.
Thank you, Councilor. Through the chair, I'll just give a quick update to the councilors that are in the meeting and the other guests. JP, you mentioned we got the letter from the chairman of the school committee. The school department has released these buildings as surplus, no longer used for educational purposes. We have also received a spreadsheet with operation and maintenance expenses for these buildings. We anticipate we will see expenses for heat, electricity, and outside contracted services. That includes fire alarm inspections and testing, security, monitoring services, inspection and testing of the sprinkler systems, the emergency lighting systems, the elevators in the building, boiler cleanings, state boiler inspections, as well as heat and electricity through the time that we own these buildings. It is kind of important that the decision to accept these buildings for general municipal purposes comes in front of the school committee, the city council as soon as possible. You know, these are public assets. We have an obligation to take ownership and responsibility for those buildings and maintain them prior to disposing of them, if that's what the city chooses to do. In terms of the equipment that's been left in the buildings, both Greg Nuttleman and myself have reached out to a local auction person. We've walked through the buildings and we are waiting for a proposal from that individual. We believe that there will be some interest for some of the surplus school equipment that's in the buildings. That includes, metal shelves, student desks, various surplus equipment that was left behind by the school department. The school department ultimately, I think, did a very good job in cleaning these buildings out. based on the amount of time they were occupied by the school department. You can imagine the storage nightmare they went through. We asked for broom clean. I think we got broom clean buildings, other than, you know, some of the surplus equipment that it will cost us money to dispose of it. So we're going to go through this auction process, see if we can have someone take this away for a nominal cost. And I think that's about the update that I have at this point.
I certainly would like, I think the members of the committee would like to have a copy of the spreadsheet, because I think we did have some questions about the costs to maintain each building individually, as opposed to the aggregate, which I believed was about $240,000 a year when it was operational as a school, as 3 schools, I'm sorry. I hope that you might be able to provide that to us, Michael.
Sure, I can do that.
Great.
The mayor
I also would like to just comment on the letter from the chair of the school committee. There was a request to have the city accept the property, but also to reserve opportunities for the school members of the school community to continue to use exterior portions of the property through the fall of 2022. I believe there were community gardens or gardens that were there. So that is also on the table for the council to discuss. I do see the mayor's hand.
Yes, just a clarification on the spreadsheet around maintaining the buildings. Michael certainly will forward those, but you're going to see that detailed spreadsheet along with an appropriation around $200,000 to $250,000 for the next council meeting. And then my understanding would be then referred to whatever subcommittee, the council president decides where it should go. I wanted to just say the items we're talking about for the schools, the school, and very respectfully so, the school has released those properties. There are surplus. There cannot be access to those gardens without the city accepting those buildings, because they now stand as a liability. And I
hear you. They stand as a liability. So the school has declared them surplus and had made a request to have the students have access to the exterior gardens. And it's your understanding that at this point, legally, they cannot be used, is what I'm hearing you say.
The school has discharged the use of the building, and they're asking a request from a body that doesn't have control over the building. So it's basically in a purgatory. And we would insure it as a vacant building, which does not allow the city to convey rights to anyone else using that as a vacant building without an agreement, because of the liability created of folks being on a building that is vacant right now.
Okay, very good. Very important point. Thank you for the information.
So just to clarify, even after we vote to accept it, we can't use the village at all.
We can make it. I think it's totally acceptable to the request of the school committee, to use the community gardens as a transition. And we would just let the insurance company know, like a rider almost in the insurance, in the policy.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Very good. I would ask at this time then if there are any members of the public who would like to take a minute or two I would invite for any public comment up to 2 minutes. I see Kate. Can you unmute yourself?
I just,
Thank
I had something written, but I'm just going to speak from the cuff. I live in Easthampton. I live in precinct 3 off of Clark on South Hampshire Street. And I've lived here for 20 years. We bought our house for $130,000 20 years ago. It was a dump, but it's a nice dump. And I've seen, the costs of everything rise in this community everywhere, but especially in this community. And I agree very strongly with Brad Riley that it's our priority in using these buildings and or properties should be for affordable housing and not get distracted by other by parking or other community projects, because not enough people will get to enjoy them if people cannot afford to live here. I feel like this is building a foundation for a more welcoming and inclusive community. And I feel very strongly that we should focus on affordable housing in terms of using these properties and not try to have mixed use or do other things that would impinge upon having the highest number of affordable units that we can have. I feel very strongly about that. I'm a social worker in the community. I work in healthcare, and the biggest issue I face with clients is housing. And it relates very much to everything in their life, but especially their healthcare. And there's very little of it to access. So I think we're in a bit of a crisis, and we should step up. Thank you.
And I said, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Does anyone else see Omar? Do you?
Yes, we have Max.
Kim? I see Kim.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you let me, I can call them by name, so that way you don't have to do it. So, Max.
Thank you. I am also a resident of Easthampton. I work at New City Brewery, and I have definitely served beer to a few of you folks. And I really enjoy having members of the community come in and chat. And I think it is important not to understate just how urgent housing is of a need in Easthampton. It is not something that we need soon. It is something that we need about a year ago, maybe 2. The RFP that you are looking at now is not something that was created lightly. Significant amounts of work from the entire community, an incredibly diverse group of people, worked very hard on that RFP that you're looking at. And they are counting on us to get housing created in Easthampton. So I implore the councilors to prioritize housing and take a very thorough look at the RFP and work to, as quickly as possible, without too much dilly-dallying, figure out how to address the problem that has been plaguing Easthampton for years and is only getting increasingly worse. I think the sentiment that parking is a necessity is a little bit easy to say as someone who has a house. I think that's a luxury to need parking. I think there's people who need a lot more than parking right now. And I think even considering parking is almost insulting to the needs of people. I'm gonna start crying soon. This is so important, and I'm going to just leave it there.
Thank you.
Kiam?
Hi, my name's Kayam. I'm an Easthampton resident. I've lived here my whole life. I am a member of the Easthampton Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership, and I'm also the acting coordinator of the Easthampton Housing Coalition. And I'm here in support of the current RFP as written. I think that right now we have a really unique opportunity that the city owns these 3 buildings and has the ability to prioritize a need that our community is facing. It's actually a crisis that our whole country is facing, but especially in Massachusetts, we have a really horrible cost of living crisis. So I also prepared something to read, but before I say that, I just want to urge all of the members of this committee to read the RFP and to realize that all of the concerns that you are laying out are reflected in that document. The first priority is affordable housing. The second priority, number 2, is community connections. That includes parking, that includes community space, that includes everything that you're talking about. So those concerns are already reflected in the document that you're looking at. And like Brad Riley said, this is something that has been a product of years of work. And if we continue to nitpick and try to change things, it can add months, which is, to us who are housing secure, does not seem like a big amount of time. But people who are, paycheck to paycheck, need a place to live. This is no joke. So I covered basically all that I wanted to say, but I also want to say that City Council will have an opportunity to weigh in on how this RFP is interpreted by the selection committee. So you guys will have another opportunity to really address and discuss how the bids address our community needs. And I think that is the point where we need to be having those conversations that you're talking about. Because as is, this RFP beautifully lays out everything that you guys have talked about. So I will just say that.
Thank you, and I apologize, Kayam.
Yeah, I'm going to say that because it was me. So I'm apologize for mispronounce your name. And I'm going to say sorry if I mispronounced someone else's name too. But I saw Scott.
Thank you, Councillor. I want to just briefly, go ahead. First, I just want to say I fully support the RFP the way it's written. I looked at it. I'm on the Community Preservation Act committee and voted unanimously with the committee to say how much we supported using those properties for affordable housing. And so I want to preface everything I say by saying that is my number one priority. Absolutely. Just in connection to what Kayam, I hope I got that right. Kayam said, in looking at sort of the next priority down with the community connection, I wanted to just say that I would encourage councilors to look at that community connection from a walking and like a pedestrian, walkable cities, a sustainable cities model. I think that I particularly think about this with Maple School. I'm a former Maple School parent. I know that playground that's there gets a ton of use from like people in the community walking to go to it. I would like to see, again, first priority affordable housing. With that, if it's a choice between parking and a community asset that's walkable or bikeable, such as that playground at Maple, I would love to see councilors find ways to include these things. At Maple, for instance, one, it gets a lot of use from the community. Two, you want nodes of connection for a walkable corridor. So like with Cottage Street, economic development wise, you want people walking that street back and forth. And we've got a great node at the boardwalk to be able to have a low maintenance, small park playground that gets used, I think would really help economic development. Where it's going to come in conflict with is parking. And I really, again, echoing what some other people said, I think if we do better signage and directions for on-street parking, we have a lot more parking than people are using. And I would hate to see community assets and community properties that could really benefit everybody become parking spaces. The last thing I'll say, when I was talking to my daughter about this, she said, well, like we were talking about affordable housing, and she said, well, don't like, and then she went to Maple, so she cares about the playground at Maple. She said, well, don't people that live in affordable housing, kids that live in affordable housing need a place to play too. Right? And so I wanted to relay that to you. So again, number one, absolutely. I think the way the RFP is written, affordable housing needs to be priority. I do want to look, when we're looking at that second tier, when we're looking at community connection, emphasize not parking, other things like playgrounds and parks that we can make those assets. So thank you.
Thank you. Shira? I hope I say it right.
You did. And mine's harder than Kayam's. You can hear me okay, right? Okay, great. So I have been an Easthampton resident since 2006. I rented off of Pleasant Street, on Pleasant Street since 2006. I've been a multifamily owner since 2014 and a single family household owner since 2017. So I've been a resident of Easthampton for a long time. I just in December joined the Fair and Affordable Housing Partnership and have joined with the Easthampton Housing Coalition as that has been developing in the past few months. So I'm here to echo what many of you have said, Councilor Brad, Kate, Kayam, and now Scott too. So ditto to all of that. And also as a tenant, I just would like to share some anecdotal support. I have a 2-family house on Northampton Street, and one of my tenants has fallen into kind of a rut, I guess, with her, with a stable work, stable income. And so I've been working with her to kind of like budget and get her on like a payment plan so she can catch up. Because if I kick her out, she has nowhere to go. And so this is the kind of thing where I feel so passionately about needing more affordable housing in Easthampton, because this woman with her 2 kids and her new grandchild has literally nowhere to go without more work issues and pulling kids out, her 2 teenagers out of the schools and being able to afford first class and security. And you know all the perils, you know them all, I don't have to tell you, but I just wanted to share that that hasn't really been mentioned so far yet today as like the landlord tenant relationship. So I just wanted to share that as well, to think about, you know, like I'm doing my best to keep her safe in Easthampton because she doesn't have anywhere else to go right now.
Thank you. Councilor Gomez?
Kyla?
Hi there, it's Kayla. Thanks for trying. I appreciate it. My name is Kayla Laurent. I am an Easthampton resident of 2 years now, going on 3. And I'm just here to support the standing of the RFP as currently written, as I truly believe it accurately reflects our priorities as a city, while also respectfully placing affordable housing as a top priority. Here we have drafted an opportunity with city-owned property to move quickly in utilizing and reconstructing. It would be our community's best interest to continue to lift our city and more specifically our disproportionately affected community members. Specifically speaking to myself as a Cottage Street employee and a para-educator in our community, I'd also like to put forth some thoughts to take forward surrounding affordable housing. I know affordable housing often carries some unwarranted social stigmas that not only have some long-lasting harmful effects on our community, on all communities, but there are also some false narratives. The affordability crisis is also affecting your servers, your neighbors, your friends, those Cottage Street employees that you see, those Union Street employees that you see frequenting at Shelburne or at the gas station, and your community members. So it's important to move quickly and swiftly as possible and keep in mind what your life without housing security might look and feel like. So just keeping in mind that while making this decision, and as so many others before me have already spoken, the current RFP does already have in place so many of the things that a lot of the counselors have already spoken on or been curious about what might be missing. Like I said, the first thing at the top of the list was affordable housing. Second being what brings our community together. And a lot of the things that were feared to be missing are under that category, being just right in the second spot. So I really urge everyone to go and read that RFP. It is a long document, so take the time to scan through it if you can, because it really has everything encompassed in there. I think it's beautifully written, and it has everything that our community might seemingly be missing at this time. So Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jana?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jana Tatro. I'm the chair of the Affordable and Fair Housing Partnership. I live at 52 Pomeroy Street. So many of you have heard from me before. It will come as no surprise that the Housing Partnership fully supports the RFP as currently written. We're really excited for this opportunity for the city. But I also wanted to just give a little bit other context in my work life. I work at Community Action Pioneer Valley, which is our region's anti-poverty agency. Our mission is to work with low-income families and individuals to help them with economic security. And we administered the Easthampton Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context of that program. We did assist 76 households in Easthampton during that time. And 25% of the folks that we assisted were children under the age of 18. 31% of them were people with disabilities. 25% were single parents. Many of those households were all affected by COVID. That was one of the requirements of the program. But the funding that the city provided with that program really helped stabilize those households. And many of those households would have found themselves homeless because in many cases, they were not living in subsidized housing. So the vast majority of the folks that we assisted were living in market rate housing that is very expensive. And they were, we did assist some folks in subsidized housing, but I just want to give that little bit of context of the volume of need that Community Action sees in the city of Easthampton. I also, I am was a Maple Street parent. Both of my kids went to Maple School. And prior to COVID, if anyone else had a child there, you may recall that Maple School had community eligibility. And that's because there were a large enough number of low-income students that went to Maple School that the entire school qualified for free school lunch. And that was before COVID. So, I think, again, that's really important information for us to think about when we think about our city, that there are a lot of children living in poverty. There are a lot of families that are really struggling. And I think it's an enormous opportunity for the city to be considering these 3 buildings for affordable housing, and there's a huge need in the city. So thank you.
Thank you. Planner back.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening. Can everybody hear me? I haven't never not talked this little in a meeting before, but thank you for letting me talk for a minute. There's a lot of great input and commentary happening right now, and I think it's fantastic. I didn't know if I was going to have another opportunity to just kind of try to encapsulate a couple things, so I'm going to take the opportunity now. I do think it's really great, the committee kind of trying to lay out the next couple of meetings. I think that's really important to get that kind of schedule going. I would ask to gauge the committee's willingness to make sure, I would like to have the opportunity to have the city's consultant at probably the next meeting would make the most sense, to do a little bit of a presentation on the RFP to help just make sure everyone understands how the mechanics of how it was set up to work, and have a discussion of that, because I think that it's worthwhile. It seems like there's still a little bit of confusion about how we have a priority of affordable housing, and then the ranking would allow, the city council to then evaluate, projects later. So that would be one thing. The other couple of things I would mention is that, a couple of things that have come up, flexibility for a group responding to the RFP is pretty much the one of the highest priorities that we are hearing from people out there. I think the clarity that we're trying to present is that there are community goals and needs identified, but we really need to let a developer understand and evaluate the buildings, and so they can present back to the city what works the best. And with the flexibility, they can do that. And then I think, as Kayam said, city council has the say of approving or not approving the proposal. So we need to kind of release it with flexibility, and then evaluate the proposals to gauge how close they came to really acknowledging what we asked for. The this is just something, I think I mentioned this before. It's just a question I want to air out with the committee members is the idea of these discussions are great and they're very in depth. And then a public hearing was discussed at the property committee level. And I just want to make sure that we have enough of the other city councilors aware and participating at that stage, because when it comes back to full city council, it would be rough if at that late stage we get a question from a counselor who wasn't able to attend or was not aware, and that's automatically another 2 weeks out. So just figuring out if how to engage the other city councilors at this stage. I think that's kind of the thing that you are setting out to do, and I just want to make sure that the other councilors are aware that that's happening. There were a couple mentions to like the idea of whether parking would fit and playgrounds. I think Scott mentioned Maple Street in particular. I do really want to remind the committee members and members of the public that there is a wealth of information on the project website. So we have the RFP, but there's 28 other documents that have all been feeding that RFP. And one in particular is that we were lucky to get a project with Mass Development. They offered the city technical services, and they have a conceptual plan for Center Pepin and a conceptual plan for Maple Street. It's not saying that that's what's going to happen, but it's more like a fit test. So it does show that it is reasonable to expect a few public parking spaces and tenant parking spaces and green space that would be available for a playground or tenant use or public use. So we did some of those analyses, and that's available. And then another really important piece of information that I would be remiss to not kind of share is in 2016, as the city was preparing to go forward with building a new school, there was it's called the Maple Elementary Preliminary Design Program. And so, architects did a deep dive into each of the 3 buildings to evaluate the condition. It describes them in detail. It describes their mechanicals. It identifies a lot of the issues and concerns that exist in the buildings that actually led us to the new building. And so in the webpage, I did excerpt out the relevant section about the schools, and that by itself is 90 pages of information about the school. So I think those are the things that I think the homework assignment made a lot of sense. But we just want to be here to help, because I think the questions that I heard so far, I have a list, but Councilor Kozinski kind of laid out one of the most important things that I think I heard was just understanding the number of units and the importance of that. And so even that is really helpful, because I think we can try to bring that information at the next meeting. So I think the last thing I was going to say is just a reminder, just to preface this on, we are looking at, as a community, we are looking at what's best for the city and what's appropriate, but we really have to be thinking about what's financially feasible and who will carry the financial burden to make stuff happen. So I just think that really needs to be continuously in the thought process, is that we can hope for something to happen, but if it's not financially feasible, either for the city to do or a private developer to do, then we just need to be honest as we approach this. So I probably had other things on my list, but I just wanted to air those out, and just offer that I think the mayor, myself, the DPW director, Michael Owens, we're all here to help. As soon as we identify what the questions are, we want to really work to get you the answers. And then the public hearing, should happen as soon as possible, because you'll have questions, the members of the public will have questions, and we still need time to decipher that. So like right now, the pencil sketch of the calendar is like October, would be the earliest we would release the RFP, and that would have us getting responses in like February. So just know that we still have a long lead time, but I will stop talking now. Thank you.
Thank you, Planner Bag. Councilor Gomez, anyone else? I do see the mayor's hand, but was there anyone else, Councilor Gomez?
No.
We're running up on at least an hour and a half, an hour and 15 minutes at this point. Mayor?
Yes, I just have a few points. One, as we speak about the different concerns that the committee has and wants to look at, I would ask that I would ask the council to do a little homework and look at any option that was meant today that you want to take another look at. And please look at page 29 of the RFP and show the public where that idea is disallowed or eliminated by the RFP. Two.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Two, with all due respect, the city over the last 5 years has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on making affordable housing possible in Easthampton through public input as well as council and this subcommittee. And I have to say, with all due respect, for whatever reason, for the city council to have this RFP and 28 documents, public documents on a website that date back 2 years, and now getting an RFP on May 26th, and we're at this point now, is unconscionable. Who have we lost in this city? Who is homeless since May? You also, as a council and a committee, you get a second bite at the apple. For us to conjure what a developer may or may not put together for these 3 schools, which the RFP allows for all possibility, is not anyone's job. Our job is to communicate what the community hopes for these properties that we have known will be empty since the day MSBA said we could build the pre-K 8 school. And at that point, when the proposals come back, there is a clear grid that the council can go and say yes or no, this doesn't make sense, or it doesn't capture the community spirit. In closing, I will be putting a written request forward to the city council president to remove this RFP from the subcommittee, property committee, my apologies, and put before the city council for a full public hearing and a city council vote. And that you'll have that by the next city council packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Was there anyone else, Omar?
I don't see anyone else.
Thank you. At this time, we would close the public speak portion of the meeting. And just understand, I believe, that this process is mandated by state law. So what we do is for the benefit of the entire city, and we will be doing that. That part of the process, there has to be agreement with the entire proposal in order to send out any RFP. And I will reiterate, we are doing our due diligence. And every member of the council is invited to every discussion, whether it be a property committee meeting or any other meeting. So I would hope to address Planner Bag, your question about making sure that we have in attendance the council member, the councilors. They will definitely be invited by myself, and I believe I can speak for President Gomez that any meeting where we will be holding discussions, all the councilors are specifically invited, because this is a serious and important issue for the entire city. Once we make the decisions, they will be lasting for the entire city. Whether we get back can include a gymnasium, whether we include any portion, or we have the entire buildings become affordable housing. So that's what we'll be working on. I would expect that everyone has read the proposal, and it seemed clear to me that the proposal had no requirements for anything but affordable housing. And I would ask the members of the committee to think about whether there would be restrictions on anything in particular, or whether they were too comfortable with the waiting process that is before us, or whether there should be some other way we review the waiting process. I think that's important for us to make our decisions as to how we dispose of the public buildings. I believe we will be receiving the information from the city attorney regarding the language for acceptance, and I would expect that we would have that available on September 7th. Councilor Gomez or Councilor Zaret? Any thoughts at this point?
My mic's on. Yeah, just to echo what was said by the planner, that the proposal is very thorough, and I do encourage people to make sure that they have reviewed it, and that there are a significant amount of documents on the website that add a substantial amount of ancillary information that is very valuable, both in terms of the history of the buildings as well as potential future use. And definitely just to agree with Mr. Kavanaugh that we need to think about these spaces as connecting points and how we can best leverage that space for non-parking uses, including a variety of parks, green spaces, gardens, fostering ecologically responsible policies through these spaces as well. But yeah, I can't encourage people enough to make sure that they review the entirety of the documents that are available. And just also for the public to know, in terms of meeting on this, other than the school tour, this is our first opportunity as a committee to really be able to discuss this. And I do recognize the urgency to move forward, which is why I think we do need to do so. And I think setting these meetings, and we might not need all of them, in my opinion, but I think it is important to speak to the dire need for housing, as well as just to respect the process here and make sure that we're getting this done and getting it to the goal line in an appropriate timeline. That's all.
Councilor Gomez?
I just want to add that we should be ready for the next meeting. Be ready for the meeting 31st to start working and reviewing the whole RFP. I encourage Michael Owen to be there. Councilor City Planning Bag should be there. The mayor should be there. And we start working on that and see if we move forward. Definitely it's our job to do our due diligence to review the RFP. We know that there was a group of people working really hard. We believe that people was working on the RFP thinking of what was the best for the community. And we believe that they did a really good job. But it's our job to review it. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it didn't take that much time. But we're here for that. We are working on it. We are pushing to have multiple meetings before making the last decision. But I can promise to the constituents, to the community, that we're moving forward. I know what is the need of having a housing. I really know. I used to live in housing because I didn't have the money to buy a house or property. So I know the needs. If someone in this committee probably will know the needs, it's this one right here. And I think that's really important to keep moving it. And I'm pretty sure we're gonna bring this forward soon to the full council to vote on it.
Thank you. That being said, I would look forward to the meeting on the 31st at 6 p.m. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Councilor say aye.
Councilor Jarrett?
Aye.
Aye. We'll see you all on the 31st. Thank you.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.